Hi everyone, it's Frank from Frankly Speaking. Today we're going to talk about the writing task 1 from the IELTS test. If you're aiming for a 7 or higher, I suggest you watch this video. It should fast track your success. Let's start by talking about this part of the test and why it's important to learn these kinds of writing skills. Okay, the IELTS task 1, in this case today we're going to talk about describing line graphs. Line graphs are one of the most common tasks that you would get on the IELTS task 1, and also it's something that you see in everyday life. Something like this. I can picture seeing this in a textbook, in a newspaper, on TV. It's quite common. But how do we express in words what is happening with this information here? And how do we go from looking at this picture to writing something like this? That is what we'll be talking about today. So, why is this important? Writing in this way helps you to think more logically. When you describe a chart, you decide which changes are important and explain them step by step. Also, it helps you at work. Many jobs nowadays use charts and percentages, and they expect you to give presentations about said numbers. Obviously, if you're taking the IELTS test, it's very important that you learn how to do this so that you can get a high score. If you are someone who needs to give presentations regularly, then this kind of writing is perfect for improving your presentation skills. And the reason for that is when we write an IELTS task 1, we're actually trying to present this information. We're taking a chart, a visual, and we're changing it into words so that the person that's reading it is able to understand what you saw and what information you saw in that chart. Doing this also helps you to learn critical reading skills. Nowadays, we see a lot of articles and information that has charts like this, and sometimes it's just a good life skill to know how to maybe analyze and question the kind of information that we're looking at. Okay, now if you're writing this kind of task, there are some mistakes that I want to warn you now before you start. These are some things that you need to avoid doing from the very beginning. One of them is being too vague. Vague means general or not specific. So when you write this, you need to imagine that the person that's reading what you write is going to look at what you've written and will try to draw the same chart using only the information that you wrote. If you wanted someone to achieve that or be successful in doing that, you would want to give very specific information in your writing so they know exactly how to redraw this table. Now, obviously, this is not something that needs to be done. Nobody's going to read your writing and try to draw the chart again, but you should consider or you should think about how you can word your writing in a way that someone else can easily do that. Another mistake you want to avoid is repeating the same words. This is one of the more creative sides of this kind of writing. You need to avoid repeating the same words over and over again. So if you're writing about sales, for example, what we're looking at today, you don't want to say sales, sales, sales over and over again. You want to find some synonyms, some other ways of writing or communicating the same idea, or even finding ways of avoiding using that word again. There are a lot of techniques in English, like ellipsis, for example, to avoid just writing certain words that you're repeating over and over again. Skipping the overview. This is a mistake that I see from people at the beginning when they're starting to learn how to write these task one writings. You need to be able to, you need to write an overview, but you also need to make sure that that overview, it states all of the overall changes that occur over the time of the whole table, okay? The overview is not talking about any details within the chart. It's just giving us an overview. Overall, did the trend increase? Did it decrease? Was there a big fluctuation or some kind of event that occurred that made a big change between some numbers and other numbers? Okay, using the wrong units. This is a big mistake. If you make this mistake, it will completely ruin your writing. Make sure that when you start, before you start writing, that you look at the chart, you analyze the chart, and you find what kind of units are being used in it. In this case today, we're going to talk about percentages, but there are more options. There might be dollar values or euro, pound, so money. Or there might be quantities, numbers, okay? Like sometimes it's numbers in the thousands or numbers in the millions. Ignoring important details. Make sure that you highlight all major movements. You can't skip any of the major movements that you see. For example, if there's a peak in the data, then you need to make sure that peak is mentioned. If there's a moment where sales drop completely, you know, to almost nothing, you need to make sure that that's mentioned as well. Those are key points. And finally, using the wrong verb tense when you're writing this. Make sure you look at the time frame in this line graph. Is the year 2020 or is the year 2025, or is it talking about the future? Is it talking about maybe a projection for the future? You need to make sure that your verb tenses correspond with the time that the chart is referring to. All right, so let's start by talking about percentages in general and some ways that we can improve the way that we write about percentages. Okay, so if you're dealing with percentages, how would you know? Where would you look? At the bottom of the chart, you have months. So here we have the time on the x-axis. At the left side here, we have percentages from 0 to 100. So if you see here percentages, then you know, in this case, we are dealing with percentages. Make sure that you look carefully at this y-axis, because here's where you'll see if you're dealing with percentages or with values like dollars, pounds, euro, population figures that might be in thousands or millions. Now, a lot of mistakes that I see when people begin to write these IELTS Task 1s is mixing up the words percent and percentage. All right, what is the difference between these two words? Percent is this symbol right here, and this symbol represents just the word percent. So that means we use percent after a number, okay? This is 5%. And if you want, you can write 5% like this. Percentage is a noun, and we use percentage with the phrase, the percentage of beep, okay? The percentage of sales increased, for example, okay? Usually with of, almost always used in this way, the percentage of something. Please note that you do not need to write percent every time, and you can use the percent symbol, but please, please, please don't mix both on a single page. It looks messy, okay? Don't write something like this. In 2023, it was 30%, but quickly rose to 40%. Don't write it with a symbol and then write it in words. Either choose to write it all in symbols or all in words. I personally think use the symbol. You're not going to get points for writing the word percent 30 times in a writing, okay? So don't bother. Percent, you also do not need to find synonyms for the word percent. Sometimes I see students use the word rate. I guarantee you that no IELTS examiner is going to give you a higher score for using the word rate. And many times, the word rate does not mean exactly the same thing as percent. It's a different idea. Okay, make sure you learn how to master the difference between percent and percentage so you can compare data sets. Now, another important skill, if you want to improve your lexical range or your range of vocabulary, is instead of using the number form for the percentages, using a word. Okay, so 50% can be half. A quarter is 25%. 1/3 is 33.3%. 2/3 is 66.7%, more or less. 1/5 is 20%, and 3/4 is 75%. Okay, so instead of saying sales rose to 75%, you could say sales rose to 3/4 that year. All right, this is the end of the first part, but I'd like you guys to look at these practice questions. I'll give you a moment to pause the video and try to answer. Let's see how much information you remember, how much you paid attention to. So please pause the video and try to answer these 8 questions. I'll give you a moment and then I will show you the answers. Okay, here are the answers. All right, guys. That being said, thank you. Please follow the next video in this series as I explain the next part of how to complete an IELTS Writing Task 1 effectively so you get a high score on your test. All right. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.